Well, welcome to Webinar Wednesday with HHRF. We're so excited to have you all here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us on this evening. You are in for a treat. We have 4 experts that are just incredible. One of the things with HHRF, when we said, we've got to disseminate information, we need to get it out there and let's do it for free. And we thought, oh gosh, how's this going to happen? How's this going to work? And it's working. I mean, we have pros that are highly sought after, all coming together to collaborate. One of the things that we're really hoping is that we recognize that research is not a competition, it's a collaboration, that we're all in this together to really move the industry forward. So thank you so much for joining us, and you're going to hear from some incredible people. I'm going to let them actually introduce themselves because they'll do better, and I want you to start to get to know them throughout this. What we'll do is each of them will take about, so you know a little bit of the structure, what to expect, a few minutes just to introduce themselves and their organization. Really important to kind of get anchored in knowing who they are. Then we're going to kind of bounce around some ideas on, you know, what is the call to research and really why we're all inspired to be a part of the Horses and Humans Research Foundation. So please start entering stuff into the chat. Say hello to each other. I'm sure there's a lot of familiar faces here. Cheryl, who is the co-chair on the education committee with me, as well as Deborah Thompson, who is on the education committee, will be managing that, sending it over to Pebbles and I, and we'll make sure those questions get answered. But here we go. Let's just get started. And one thing, never sit to the right of me. So that's how the order goes. Kathy, you are up first. So Kathy with E3A, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I'm Kathleen Milbeck. I live in Reno, and I am on the board with E3A, which is the Equine Experiential Education Association. We've been around since actually 2008. We are a international membership organization that really has a two-prong approach to this work. One is that, you know, we have a really significant component to our organization that talks about the well-being of the horse and how the horse is a partner and not a tool, but is a partner with us. And through that collaboration, we're able to hopefully move the human race a little bit in a more positive direction. We are a certification organization, but we certify in our curriculum is a coaching curriculum. We had a beautiful opportunity for the founders of E3A to create an amazing curriculum that is a facilitation curriculum that what we do is we have people go out, partner with the horses, create activities or do activities, and then we come back and move them through a 5-question model to growth and to action plans to change things differently. So we really differentiate, even though we have a personal development component. We teach a class, but really that class is really a class taught in how to keep psychotherapy and coaching really separate. So we've opened up and started looking at the research component of this work by bringing Liz Letson onto our board back in the fall. And she's the chairperson for our research component. I am also the chair of the master trainers. So as they call me, I'm the lead mare. Or yeah. And so I try really, really hard all the time to go out and play with my herd. So I know how to, you know, keep the master trainers going. And so we have, I don't know if you want me at all, Tara or Cheryl, to go into any of the specifics of how we do. Do you want me to do that, Tara?
why don't we let everyone introduce themselves and see how we're kind of flowing with it, but certainly we're going to make sure that we have everybody's website on there. And E3A just has such an incredible protocol. I've seen some of your stuff through friends who have gone through your program, and it is comprehensive, rigorous, and just inspiring. So for sure. But why don't we task it over to Laura with Natural Lifemanship.
All right. Hi, I'm Laura McFarland. I work with the Natural Lifemanship Institute. I'm actually here with my colleague, the co-founder of Natural Lifemanship, Bettina Jobe, and I'm actually going to punt and let her describe Natural Lifemanship and what we do a little bit more. But as for me, my background is in education, special education specifically, and I have a background in research within the education field, and then also program evaluation. And so I've done quite a lot of program evaluation with programs that incorporate horses to help humans. And that's sort of how I ended up finding Natural Lifemanship to begin with, encountering them. And I've been with them since 2015. I oversee education. We are an educational institute, and I oversee a lot of operational stuff right now. And my role as a researcher, I can't really do research in my role, but I promote it and facilitate it to the best that I can.
Thanks so much, Laura. All right, Bettina, you're up. You're on mute. So let's get you off of mute before you start.
Okay.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping Laura wouldn't punt to me. She's going first. She can take it all. So yeah. So my husband and I started Natural Lifemanship in 2010. I've been kind of officially working in this field since about 2000. And so, in 2010, we started Natural Lifemanship. Natural Lifemanship's an institute. We're an approach to equine assisted services that's, grounded in the relational sciences. So we talk lots about and teach a lot about trauma-informed care, the difference between trauma-informed care and trauma-focused work, lots of attachment focus, an enormous amount of just understanding healthy development of the brain and the body of humans and also horses. So our approach is really principle focused. At least that's the language we use a lot. And so it's really there's not a heavy focus on activities. There's a really heavy focus though on the nature of the horse-human relationship, because we believe really strongly that the relationship's the vehicle for change right now. I mean, that's loaded. It can mean lots of different things, but we do spend an enormous amount of time heavily focused on the welfare of not only the human, but also the horse. And because we're principle focused, oftentimes when I start talking about what we do and what we believe in our ethics and all the things, people will say, are you talking about humans or horses? And I'm like, oh, both. There's a sort of a parallel process occurring, which has been really fun in this field, especially over the last, I was probably say 10 years, but I guess we've officially been in business for 13. We did our first official Natural Lifemanship training in August of 2010. Laura was actually at that. Laura McFarland, who you just met, she was at that training. And because she's a researcher, she wrote us a review that was like 2 pages long. It was like, we asked for testimonials and she sent us this very long testimonial. At that point, I was like, oh, we're hiring her at some point. It took us a while to be able to do that. So, but, because our work is principle focused, every time we start thinking about, and so I say principle focused, it's very process oriented, very, very client driven, all of those, that language we use.
Yeah.
Anytime we start talking about research, one of the things we do run into is that we don't like cognitive behavioral therapy or something. We're not having a very, very activity driven or very like a structured approach. You
Mhm.
know, like I always say, oh, they've researched EMDR and CBT very well because there is a protocol. I mean, it's a script, right? It's
Mhm.
easier to research. And so our model is not really like that. And so that does make it sometimes when we start, I know we talk research more later, but sometimes that's the nuance and all of that can be the challenge, you know, the art in this work that we do. So we train lots of people. We're a membership organization. We're a certifying organization as well. And so really our work falls under this sort of equine assisted services umbrella. So there are coaches and there are people who are doing more leadership work. We have people who are energy practitioners or yoga instructors that are training with us. But probably still the majority of the people that train with us are doing either equine assisted psychotherapy or something that would fall underneath the equine assisted learning umbrella. But it does kind of, our students kind of run the gamut. And I see a lot of really familiar faces here today, or names, faces and names. It's good to see everybody. And thank you all for doing this. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks so much, Bettina. And it's
Yeah.
going to be a really interesting theme that we're going to see, right? Is that how do you measure a connection, right? And that's some of the challenges we have with, you know, all the independent variables that we're dealing with. And, you know, that's the difference between qualitative and quantitative, right? So we are exciting moment in the field where we can start to talk about that. And that's why we have you all here.
Oh, you know, Tara,
yeah.
never mind.
Go ahead. No, it's okay.
No, let me mute.
Pebbles has the power to unmute you, you know. All right, thanks. We'll get back to you. Veronica, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I am the founder and executive director of the Herd Institute. And like Bettina and Kathy, we offer certifications. And we're a membership organization as well. We have two different training tracks, one for licensed mental health practitioners and one for educators and coaches. So we separate out that scope of practice piece. My background is I spent a long time within the corporate world and then transitioned into getting licensed as a mental health practitioner. So I kind of had a foot in both camps. And I am really passionate about research. I am a self-confessed nerd. I will talk to anybody about this work at any time, whether that's invited or not, because I am incredibly excited about the direction that our industry is headed. And I think that research is a really important part of that progression. And in terms of how we work and the approach within the herd model, I actually created the model out of the research that I did as part of my doctoral program. So my dissertation was on the embodied experience of equine assisted psychotherapy, specifically through the lens of an existential humanistic psychology perspective, which means that we, like Bettina, you know, we're very process driven. We focus on the relationship as it emerges in the moment between horses and humans in the sessions, whether it's psychotherapy or learning. And so the model that we work from comes from the qualitative research that I conducted as part of my doctoral program. And since then, I guess I come into this webinar also wearing a different hat, being part of PATH International for a very long time. I am currently on the board of trustees with PATH as well. I'm a certified therapeutic riding instructor and an equine specialist in mental health and learning through them. And my focus is really about working collaboratively in this space, particularly when it comes to addressing cultural differences and looking at cultural competency in our field, whether that means working with an understanding of marginalized populations, stepping into a space where we are different from the people that we're serving, or whether we're talking about particular occupational cultural competencies, like if you're working with veterans and first responders, what does that mean? What do you need to understand in order to step into that space to be able to relate to the people that you serve? One of the things that we are doing at the moment within the herd is we have a couple of research projects, little baby research projects, I want to say, in collaboration with one of our graduates who is professor over at University of Arizona, Kelsey Dale John. She is spearheading a research around around the experience of creating a culturally competent framework within this field. So she's going to be interviewing a bunch of people and talking to them about what their experience has been like when diversity, equity, and inclusion has been centered as part of the training. So I'm super excited about that. And as always, I have a million ideas of what I want to do. The challenge is time.
Well, I love listening to your story, Veronica. It was just such a great way to say, you know, why you're called to the diversity and inclusion is, you know, saying that you're Chinese, British, living in the United States, you know, listening to cowgirl music, you know, so I mean, you're it, you know, all of it. So really, I loved how you really explained, you know, that there's room and space for all of it. And I think, you know, in this industry, you know, we really need to be aware of that and stay up with the trends that, thank goodness, are finally happening. Yep. So hopefully everybody in the chat is starting to ask questions, you know, starting to see how they're feeling about some of this information. What we wanted to do was kind of move through now the challenges or the exciting things that people are thinking about in research and in their field. So Veronica, you really kind of launched that conversation specifically with your dissertation. Can we pitch back to you and kind of ask a little bit about what that was and some, you know, challenges? You know, I think that's one of the things that we find in research, you know, only the ones that work to get published. And we want to start to have wow, this was a really difficult part of this, so that others who are involved, you know, can say, okay, I've experienced the same thing.
Yeah, sure. So if I may, I want to kind of take a couple of steps back from your question in order to kind of answer it, because that's quite a big umbrella. So just to give some context too, I'm a part of the editorial board for a publishing house, University Professors Press. And I am currently co-editing a textbook for the American Psychological Association in conjunction with one of my mentors from the existential humanistic psychology field. And the book is actually going to be about evidence-based existential humanistic psychology, which means that we've had to trawl through, I don't know how many research articles, literature review, you know, an extensive literature review to look at what does it mean to be evidence-based and how can we tie in the softer skills and the art of being a psychotherapist and being with people in the way that we are with the more process-driven approach that we use within existential humanistic psychology versus looking at behavioral health and CBT, DBT, which has more of a protocol-driven approach. So as part of that, I think what's important to note is that, you know, I think researchers in the past have kind of positioned themselves in an either-or camp of qualitative versus quantitative. And in any meta-analysis of data that, you know, is currently out there, we cannot definitively say which is better, right? Because they're not comparing the same thing. And I think that when we talk about what's worked and what hasn't, it really comes down to the frame of reference that you are using. If you are using a quantitative frame of reference that says, is this statistically significant? And the research comes out to say that it isn't, then does that mean it's failed?
Mhm.
From the quantitative lens, maybe, but actually, is there information there that is still valuable and still important for us to attend to from a qualitative lens? So I think it's a bit of a mix, you know, the both and that we always talk about within a psychotherapy setting, that we need to acknowledge before we even go into what is good research or not.
So well said. You know, we have Dr. Elizabeth Richardson, who's on the education committee here with us, and she just wrote up, I mean, what's the difference, you know, with all these anecdotal stories, you know, single case design is still legitimate research, you know, so this is exactly what we're really trying to work through with, you know, why are only certain things funded versus others. And specifically with the existential part, the new grant that HHRF is launching does include the spiritual component. Right. So we wanted to be open to the entire piece of this, of the experience that people are having with horses. So thank you. All right, let's get it back up to Kathy. What are your thoughts?
I guess, you know, the greatest aspect of research that I think we would all like to see is to really be able to understand what's the mechanism for change that happens within that relationship between the horse and the human. And, you know, whether it comes from that primitive part of us that is born out of the need to survive, or what I would love to find out if it's just that less primitive but still primitive need for us to understand how to operate within a herd in a really positive and loving way, because that's what they do. And they are so good about, you know, setting those boundaries. And I would love to be able to look at explaining that, especially through the coaching model, but it's really, it doesn't matter if it's coaching or it's psychotherapy. And one of the things that I didn't say when y'all were talking about it is that I am a psychotherapist in my day job. And so I understand the difference between those two, but I think that they're so intrinsically linked, and being able to explain that, because I think if we could explain that, we could explain it to the world, and it would really change what we all know happens in the arena. So, and really being able to, you know, as Veronica said, you know, pick out the parts that make it legitimate. That's the whole point. Pick out the parts that make it legitimate, and being able to convey that to people that don't really understand what happens out there.
So by legitimate, do you mean measurable? What do you mean legitimate?
Yes, measurable,
Okay.
you know, so for them, because, you know, I think I said earlier, what most people don't, the question most people ask is, you know, what does a horse have to teach me? And being able to legitimize that for people that don't understand what we understand, I think it would bring such a wonderful new dimension to this work. And so we don't need to legitimize it. We feel it, we get it, we see it. And so I think that it's about, yes, can we measure it and then reproduce it?
Oh yeah, there you go.
The
Yeah,
reproduce is a big point.
Yeah, because if we can reproduce it, then we could bring it into all of our curriculums, all of our protocols, all of our work, and then, you know, save the planet.
Awesome.
One horse at a time.
Bettina, how about you? I saw you kind of shaking your head and nodding a lot. I can feel the energy. You mind taking yourself off mute and sharing?
Sure. Okay. Lots of thoughts about what everybody's saying. I wanted to make sure, Tara, can you repeat what the original question was? that we kind of backed up from. And I just want to make sure I'm staying on track.
Ooh, just go ahead, go for it. Answer whatever you think might be the question, because I have no idea.
Okay. So one of the things well, like Kathleen, I did not mention that I am also a licensed professional counselor. And I did a master's thesis in 2005. And at the time when I did that, there wasn't any quantitative research on equine assisted psychotherapy at the time, right? And so I might be getting interrupted by a child in just a minute. If that, I'll bow out and Laura can take over for me. So, writing the literature review is tricky. Right. I basically needed to go and look at sort of the theoretical underpinnings of the work we're doing, and then look at the research on those theoretical underpinnings and argue for, what my hypothesis would be based off of the theoretical underpinnings of, based off the research, right, on what we are kind of claiming the theoretical underpinnings in the field are, right? And not a lot has changed since then, right? We still are doing that. I mean, we're talking oftentimes about the science of the work we do, and what we're really looking at is some research that has been done on a modality that we're now integrating the horses into, right? So that if I'm doing primarily somatic work, is there research done on that? And then why is it that I'm now integrating the horses into that? And so we're still asking some, and it's not a complaint, it's such a new field, right? We're still asking really similar questions.
Right.
The number one question that I probably get from people is, how do you know if this work is effective? I feel like I'm asked that question all the time. And in some ways that feels like a relatively simple answer to me. I mean, sort of, because if my clients come to me and there's a certain thing, we have certain goals we're working on, right? I care about, are they able to transfer what's being learned in sessions, what they're doing in the session, are they able to transfer that into the rest of the world, right? Now that's probably because I have this heavy slant toward quantitative research, because that's what I did. And there were so many challenges in doing quantitative research in this field with a control group and all of the things, right? And so we've seen so much research since then that's qualitative, right? That's taking us into really looking at what's the mechanism of change? Can we come to an agreement about that so we can research that thing? I don't think we're done with we're still needing so much of the quantitative work, because to me, sometimes what the quantitative work can start to say, if we can figure out what we're researching in some level, that's what Kathleen's talking about, I think. She's like, can we legitimize it? Like, is this legitimate work? Those of us who are doing this work and we're tired of people saying, oh, so y'all, you pet horses, right? And so often I think people, when they're asking that question, what they want to know is some of that quantitative piece. Like, did people come with this certain thing they were struggling with, and in the end, did that improve? Right. And when I've read a lot of the qualitative work that's been coming out, it's helping us come to what should we even research to do the qualitative stuff. And I love that, because I think that's happening in the field. And I can't remember who said, Laura may have said this earlier, actually, before we got on the call, where she was talking about that when you start looking at the qualitative research, no matter what approach or model or whatever people are using, we're coming to the same things. The mechanism of change is so similar, right? Which is, again, the argument of why it's so important for us to collaborate, whatever way that you're practicing, right? If we all start coming together and looking at the mechanism of change, I think it gives us a better idea about what can we quantitatively look at to give the statistically significant research that we're looking for.
So well said. Really appreciate that. That's a lot of information, right? But that's where we are, is right. How do we be curious? And then how do we study it? Dr. Rebecca Wargoss just said mixed methods could really help, with both of these. So it's a yes and. Elizabeth, can I pitch it to you for a second? Because this is a debate we have nearly every committee meeting. And, I can see you being so excited because this is what you talk about with us so many times. Do you mind kind of jumping in here a little bit?
Sure. There's just like the rest of you, there's so many things that I can say right now. One thing I will say, so I've been working on this thing for way too long. This is how it goes with research, right? You work on something and then you get pulled to something else, et cetera. But so I've spent a couple of years now, sadly, I think it's been almost 2 years working on this, but doing a comprehensive literature review of trauma-related services provided kind of from a mental health perspective, not necessarily from disabilities, et cetera, but really looking at, I wanted to try to capture PTSD, suicide, ideation, a range of studies within a broader mental health trauma framework. And so it's a literature review of that field. And I've been surprised, a couple things about that. I've been surprised at how many articles did meet the criteria that I set for inclusion. So I was interested in, I know some reviews in the past have just looked at, if there's a certain number of people, if it's only quantitative, if it's been, published in a peer-reviewed journal, et cetera. And I tried to open it up to dissertations, unpublished theses, qualitative work, mixed methods. And so far, I'm adding in the last 4 because I'm trying to keep it up to date. So articles that have come in up until like last month, I've got somewhere around like 52 articles that have been published looking at trauma, mental health, and use of equine assisted, equine facilitated work. To me, that's surprising. I wasn't expecting to see that many. Now, what I will say is there's definitely more qualitative. I appreciate the value of qualitative work. I publish qualitative work, but I also know that to move the science forward and be able to obtain, I think, funding and more support for doing research, more work needs to be done with a mixed methods lens, and I think a little bit more complex quantitative studies that really try to draw on, Bettina, like you were talking about, including a control group and having some consistency with how the intervention's delivered. So I think what I'm trying to do in that review is point out kind of how far we've come, but where some of the gaps are in the research being done so far. And then the other thing I've done is there's this gigantic table I've set up that outlines breakdown of each study, how many people are included, what participants, types of participants are in, and mechanisms of change, so that we can start to see, even in those studies that didn't find any significant results, what are they finding in terms of their impressions and their thoughts related to social connection and setting boundaries, et cetera.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful. So I think those are like the kind of things that we're all debating, right? And looking into, and maybe we're all doing it in a silo. And this is the opportunity to start to say, maybe Veronica knows what Elizabeth's doing and Laura is, involved in, something with this. And we just start to have a platform to share it, which was totally inspired by Molly Sweeney, who is right here. So you're the culprit for all of this, Molly. Thank you so much for being on here with us. We'll let you have a few words, but we have some questions here. So I want to just, recognize and acknowledge the chat that's going on. So any panelist, this is from Stephanie. She says, a lot of human research or social interaction in general typically follows the sociology, social work based on some level of the biology, psychology, social, and spiritual frameworks. Since that approach is already something measurable in human research, can this approach be applied to EAS research to boost legitimacy? Do you all see that chat going on? Are you able to look up that big, long question? Great question, Stephanie, right? So, if they're already doing it, with human, is it replicable now with the human horse interaction? I think is what you're asking. Any panelists want to jump in on that one? Go ahead, Veronica, thanks.
Yeah, I love that question. I think, again, for me, it's about the context, that the struggle that we have within our industry is, just listening to everybody speaking, we're talking about equine facilitated psychotherapy, equine assisted services. We can't even agree on the definitions of what we are doing. Add on the layer of, the different modalities of mental health practitioners who also have the same or similar process around, what the definitions are or the protocols within that. Yes, I think the simplistic answer to Stephanie's question is yes, of course we can translate it, but it's not that clear cut. Once we take into consideration, the differences between social work and counseling, the differences between the populations that we are studying, the lens through which we're looking in terms of the population that we're studying, what are the differences in terms of our own cultural biases and impressions that we are imposing onto the populations that we might be studying. So there's so many nuanced layers to it. I don't think that it's as easy as just transposing. And I'm not saying, Stephanie, that that's what you were suggesting, that it would be easy, but I think that there is something that we can take, yes, and we need to customize it to the needs of this industry.
Well said. I mean, that's really what, the path is here is rigorous, right? What does rigorous really mean, and how to not water that down so that it's still considered anecdotal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Liz has a really good question. She says, I'm curious as to what short-term and long-term outcomes of incorporating horses into coaching, et cetera, are. And what is it about the horses that leads to those outcomes? So for instance, why horses and not guinea pigs or dogs or, right? Llamas, whatever it might be. Anybody have an idea about the short and long-term outcomes of incorporating horses into coaching?
Liz, what did you mean? You mean like whether or not the change lasts short-term or long-term? You're muted. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, hi, everybody. Yeah, so I guess that's what we've been trying to tease out here with our team up in Minnesota. And we created a scale called the Human Animal Interaction Scale. And actually, Angie Fournier is on the call too, and I might invite her to pop in here and talk about this a little bit too. But so yeah, I'm a LPCC, licensed professional clinical counselor. I've been in this work since I started out EGALA certified in 2009. And I realized right away, I've always been a horse person and I had an undergrad in psychology, but I realized that this is so powerful. I decided to go back to grad school and go into private practice. And so I did my master's paper on basically what is it about metaphor and horses? Like, is there a connection? And so we were like curious. And so Angie, and I'll give her the credit for this because she's like the research side, and I'm like, this is the laboratory out here at the ranch. We just finished up a group session. That's why Marissa and I are in here, still in my barn office. Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense. So what you're looking at is setting up scales, really important. And then what you're looking at is the short term and long term. Bettina, does that help you or Kathy, does that kind of help you understand a little bit more about what Liz is saying? Is it the short term, long term? How do we have standardized scales, right?
Right. And I think that, when Stephanie was talking about all the ways that we measure human interactions, human growth, I think that one of the ways that we could pair that up is to pair that up with the relationship between the horse and the human, because we all really know, all that are in the psychological field, we always know where the real magic change happens is between the practitioner, whether they're an MD or a PhD, and the client. And this time what we're doing is, I think, finding if we can find a way to measure what happens in that relationship, that moment of relationship between the horse and the human, and we can measure it and then repeat it, that's where I think we want to go, or that's what I think is such powerful information to understand, no matter what discipline it is, psychology, coaching, no matter what. And so being able to identify that, and like what Liz talked about, having these more concrete measures, then we can also ask, did that work and why did it work? And can we get to the why of why it worked? Even though all of us who worked with clients know that it happens in that connection between the healer and the client.
And how fascinating, right? We know the therapeutic alliance is really
Yeah.
what launches this. And maybe what we're basing our work on is the therapeutic alliance is actually with the horse.
Exactly.
Pretty
And it's our job, whether we're doing it from, the psychology component or the coaching component, is to put the verbiage to it so that the client can hear it in a way that they're more comfortable in hearing it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. We've got another great question from Melanie, and then maybe we just kind of let the panelists all chit chat among each other and kind of bounce some ideas around, next steps and what they look like. So one more last question from Melanie. She says, I understand the need for replicable research to validate the modality of equine assisted services. However, can I ask a question that perhaps suggests we may need to step back and consider something else first? Why do we have so many independent methods and certifying bodies in this industry? If we can't consolidate the approach to an official national registry or certification standard, does that suggest a fractured industry that needs to be addressed first? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, let's see. Bettina, you're up.
I want to piggyback. I love that question. I think it's a beautiful question, but I want to piggyback on something Veronica said, which is she mentioned, in psychotherapy, we have, I don't know how many disciplines.
Right.
And really, I think I don't think it's fractured at all. I think Bettina said it, maybe Laura said it, but it's like, you look at all of these approaches, just like you look at all the approaches in psychology, and then you say, what works best for me? What is it that I can really hear? And so I love the fact that we come from all these different disciplines, because our perspectives are so different that each person can join up. Do you like me throwing in that horse term?
Good pun.
They can join up with the theory that works best for them.
Really appreciate that. How about for you, Bettina? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Kathleen. This is a question that we hear a lot. It's a question that comes up on social media a lot. And, it'd be just as hard to say, what is the quote, the field of equine assisted services, as it would be to say that we need to bring together all these modalities that are doing trauma-informed care, right? So many of us are doing different work. We're coming from a different place, right? And that's, Veronica mentioned that's part of what's tricky about research is, I might lean more toward somatic experiencing, or lean more toward EMDR, or lean more toward some other way of practicing, right? That I do more play therapy, and I'm integrating horses into that. And that does change the work that we're doing, right? And so it's actually a little bit of a stink I've had for years that we continue to talk about the equine assisted field like we're all doing the same thing just because we integrate horses. Or somebody who's doing physical therapy is doing something very valuable, right? Occupational therapy, very valuable and different. And it's the same in this kind of field we live in, right? Where it's like, well, even, as a coach or as a psychotherapist, is what I'm doing, there's overlap in lots of these because we have the horse in it, but it makes it a different practice. So I agree with Kathleen. I don't think we have a fractured field. I think we have a growing field. And what's happening in our field is exactly what's happened in any other field out there, right? In the mental health world. I've been trained and certified in a bazillion things over the last 25 years in doing this work. And I love every training, and there's always overlap in what's being taught, but it's packaged a little bit differently. It's a little bit different way of learning, and it contributes to my tool set. I think that's happening in our field. And I think it's felt fractured because we're so new that when it first started, there were like 2 organizations. I mean, 13 years ago when we started our business, there were like 4. And
Right.
that continues to grow, but that's what happens in a growing field as we continue learning and growing and deepening. So I totally agree with you, Kathleen, about that. But yes, it does make research tougher. Yeah, absolutely.
Veronica, any thoughts about that, or Laura?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And there's also for me, this desire to make everything standardized is attractive because it makes things simpler to manage. But what we lose in the standardization is diversity of thought and creativity and acknowledging the value of difference, which is something that is so unique to the work that we do, and how we do it. And there is research out there that suggests, from a psychotherapy lens, that it doesn't matter what modality you are trained in, but that the effectiveness of the work is based on the relationship. So if we can take that element of the research and apply it to the relationship that we have with horses in the work that we do, then maybe we can move forward with it. Whereas if we look at stripping out the differences and making it standardized, I think we would lose so much of what is valuable with all the different perspectives that we bring.
Really good
Yeah.
point. And
I completely agree, Veronica, and that speaks to the importance of incorporating qualitative techniques even within, in mixed methods studies. And you spoke to this earlier, but how do you tease out if the relationship really is a mechanism of change, which a lot of psychotherapy rests on, right? Then how do you compare what one person does with what another person does? These are different people and different relationships that are emerging. Sorry, my dogs are being loud. So I really think that one of the opportunities we have, really getting back to mechanisms of change, is that we do, Elizabeth, I would love to hear more about your literature review. The 52 studies is quite impressive. And I'm guessing that it's hard to compare across them, the actual outcomes. Like, how do you synthesize the results of all of those studies? And I think that mechanisms of change and identifying those and beginning to do some research that synthesizes, like, this is what is being found across the literature, regardless of the actual intervention. If horses are being incorporated, then we tend to see these things come up in the qualitative literature. And I think that gives us an opportunity to actually start combining studies and, looking at smaller aspects of it, not just the big, is it effective question, but, what are some ways, what does connection actually look like? Or what is, our questions could change as a result of that. And we could start to look on a more granular level at some of that.
so well said, you guys. One of the things that's coming up in the chat is, again, the soft science of this, maybe, right? Versus some of the other ones that are, you know, X plus Y equals Z type of thing because of human subjectivity. And that's where the challenge is a little bit. But what we're seeing here is this conversation in itself is saying that we are all in this to collaborate and share with such an open heart and an open mind on, hey, this worked for me. Maybe that would work for that client or for that, you know, area. You know, things are going to be done differently in Texas than they're going to be done differently in Finland, right? So again, this is happening all around the world. And what we're even finding, one of Molly's challenges was when she was looking at the equine well-being, you know, there's a cultural difference on the way people work with horses.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's even fascinating, right? And, you know, some of the research we're doing on one of the reservations, you know, so all of these different things are so exciting, but it does complicate things. And I think if we keep these forums open and asking questions, you know, this is the way forward. You know, Pebbles or Molly, you know, either of you have anything that you'd like to add? I see Molly there and just smiling at how far this has come. Could we just give you the last few minutes of the floor if there's anything you want to add? Let's take you off mute. Pebbles has the power.
That Pebbles and I are involved with is we're working with an international group representing 5 different international countries. And our goal is to have an international global repository for research in EAS that will be on open science or somewhere. Well, maybe we'll have our own platform, but where you can go and you can type in and say, I'm interested in veterans, I'm interested in horses, I'm interested in whatever it is. And you can be able to pull up internationally, worldwide, any of the research there that is available, that you'll be able to check it, because that's one of the hardest things, as you certainly know, Elizabeth, is trying to find where that research is and how do you get at it. So we hope that we'll be able to make that a lot easier. Pebbles, you want to add anything to that?
I was about to say there is a group in Europe that has formed a kind of a subgroup of HEDI who are doing research, and I have put their slide and information on our website. So if you go to the research tab, you can connect with them or ask them questions about research if they're doing anything in your area, just FYI.
Such an exciting discussion. I love the energy. It's so neat to see, you know, everybody's faces nodding and kind of like, yes, we're all saying the same thing, you know, but coming at it from a different lens, you know. That was one of the things in the chat also is, you know, we're looking at these from different lenses, but there seems to be some consistency. You know, certainly equine well-being, you know, we can all agree on that, right? Certainly, you know, ethical standards with our clients, we can all agree on those. So it really is an interesting discussion. We have about 3 more minutes. So maybe if the panelists have anything they'd love to kind of just close with or a last, you know, inspirational statement, that's pretty loaded, but go for it.
Not an inspirational statement, but in the spirit of collaboration, we've been working at the Herd Institute to start to collate research articles and basically everything that I've ever pulled off the internet in the past 15 years. I have created a Google document that has links to all of them. And so Pebbles, if that's something that you want to cross-reference with your resources, I'm happy to share that.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Well, one of the things as we're wrapping up, HHRF is actively looking for more people to join the education committee. So please reach out to Cheryl or myself or Pebbles. You know, so many people have so many ideas. So we would absolutely love, you know, if you want to reach out to us, how you can share. There's task force all the time if a committee is too much of a commitment for you. And of course, you know, the spirit here is that this is available for free. So if you want to support us and you loved this discussion, no shame in my game, but hit the donate button. There's, 60 or so of us on there. And if we each donate $25 or $50, that gets us a third of a way to the next innovation grant. So please share the love and spread it out to your colleagues. If you have other people that you think would, be interesting webinars, we are always open to your suggestions. And this is really here for you, so please stay connected with us. So much gratitude. And we are, I think, ready to close, so we usually keep it open a little bit longer, but I think we can stop the recording now. And again, say, join us for the next webinar Wednesday. Next one's with Mary Jo Beckman, who is absolutely fabulous, really a leader in the industry with her work down at Walter Reed Hospital and the caisson down there. So she will be comparing riding and carriage driving. Pretty interesting.